So welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay from the ongoing RP series on the official Discord. And last time we saw what would happen if there was a civil war between the evil factions where Rune and Karn were vying for control of Edoras, and this time next to the sea to the west of Middle-earth we are going to be seeing two of the westernmost factions that should really be fighting together, but obviously it is an RP series so anyone can declare war on anyone. We have the elves of Lindon facing off against the men and Dunedain from the kingdom of Cardlan. So this battle was sent to me by, I think it was Engsfitz. Yes, it was definitely Engsfitz. I've had a couple of battles from the RP series, so I'm just trying to sort of keep track of all of them so far. We'll be going through Lindon first of all. This map does have a rather strange deployment zone. You'll notice that Cardlan essentially had a narrow deployment zone near to the sea, whereas Lindon had a wider deployment zone, the kind of which you would normally see on a map like this. Interestingly enough, the map's most interesting feature is actually down here, where you've got these, this series of high ground and these ruins. Cardlan could go and occupy them, and I think that would be the move to try and make here, because it would be quite difficult for Lindon to wear down Cardlan, I think, depending on how well Cardlan can use their skirmishers like their crossbows. Because in melee, Lindon will certainly have the edge with units like Harlindon Infantry and 4 Lindon Pikemen here. There's also some 4 Lindon Archers, which of course the Elven Archers will still be able to do a lot of damage, especially to the more lightly armoured units within Lindon's force, like the Cardlan Pikemen. There's some Marines as well, so obviously the Javelin Fire could be very, very lethal. And also a very sneakily placed unit of Wardens of Elos Tyrian, hoping to maybe move in and shoot right down the ranks of Lindon with how they were deployed. And there's also the Chariots, which the Chariots, if they're used aggressively, could break up any attempt from Lindon to move over to the higher ground. And of course there's also some catapults. Do remember that this is an RP battle, so the compositions may be a little bit different than the type you would usually see on like a normal multiplayer battle where the red limit will come into play. So we have another unit of Wardens of Elos Tyrian, so Creed is playing, it's worth saying, and Rules 1. So both of them will be playing on the Lindon side. Some Noldorin Horse Lords over here, obviously very powerful knights. Cardlan really don't have anything on horseback which comes anywhere close to the Noldorin Horse Lords. Harland Infantry, 4 Lindon Marines, similar force overall. It's looking like Harland Infantry and 4 Lindon Pikemen should be more than enough to deal with most Cardlan infantrymen. High Elven Ballista as well, 4 Lindon Archers, and then of course we'll get into Engsfitz's army also, 4 Lindon Archers, looking quite similar overall. There is a unit of Noldorin Guard over here from Engsfitz, however, as well, so the more heavily armoured unit from Lindon. Another unit of Noldorin Horse Lords, some Mithlond Marines as well, so the slightly stronger Javelin variant, which is also a little bit stronger against infantry in melee, and some more Chariots. And then the final Lindon army at the back, acting really as the reinforcements for everyone else, is going to be J-Monster. So we have the Realm of Lindon, and back here we have... Oh, I hope I'm not standing on any toes by doing this. I hope J-Monster isn't... I know that J-Monster's been working on a few replays. I really hope that this one isn't one of them. Oh well, even if it is, I mean, miscommunication happens from time to time, I suppose. Noldorin Guard, a couple of units of Noldorin Guard, some Mithlond Marines, also some Wardens of Elos Tyrian, and then a force of cavalry as well, so some Wardens of Harlindon, 2 units of them in fact. So obviously the Horse Archers, we'll see how useful they are against Cardlan, especially if they take up a more defensive posture. Speaking of Cardlan, let's start going through their armies now. Wedged up against the sea, first of all we have Von Mountain, a couple of units of civilians, and also an upgraded unit of the Dunedain captains, very, very potent. I didn't see any Noldorin Blade Masters actually, so they may very well be one of the most, or if not the most dangerous infantry unit on the field today. A couple of units of cavalry, they're going to have to be used very defensively with the support of spears if possible, because the Lindon cavalry is so much better. Merc War Chiefs as well, so again some swordsmen. Decent skill, but again outmatched by Lindon here. Greenwatch Garrison Spearmen and Footmen, so a combination of cheap pikes and spears. The crossbows and some of the more heavily armoured units like the Hearthguard of Amon Sul are going to be critical for Cardlan's success here. Sharpshooters as well. Also a Trebuchet, which is probably going to try and get out of here and into a more advantageous position. Definitely not the best place for it down here. But we'll see how successful Von Mountain is at navigating those pitfalls. We have Inarius, who's got some Tharbad Riders. Very lethal charge, but again, most of the Lindon cavalry will be able to dumpster them in melee. Royal Court of House Durondor, similar story here. The Noldorin Horse Lords are going to be able to defeat them quite easily in spite of their multiple HP nature. Unit of Miniscarithlan Swordsmen a little bit further back, and a little bit further forwards. We have some Sharpshooters, we have some Minotaur Roman Guardians and some Miniscarithlan Swordsmen. On the front line here we do have some Greenwatch Garrison Footmen and some Greenwatch Garrison Spearmen once again, so obviously cheap but effective. Wardens of Tirn Gorthad in the middle as well, offering their morale buff, which obviously can be very, very important for Cardlan. We'll see how that goes though. Lindon might be able to pick apart these pikemen. Hearthguard of Amon Sul, I would imagine there's probably some hidden archers in the trees here, in addition to some Dunedain captains as well. And over here on the flank, we do have Eclipse 2500, who has some Miniscarithlan archers as well as some more spearmen. Miniscarithlan swordsmen, pikes, similar overall. Cardlan, you don't see a lot of deviation in Cardlan's infantry a lot of the time. Their infantry is just meant to be functional, and then they win the battle elsewhere, usually through their crossbows, Minotaur, Roman Guardians and Sharpshooters here once again. Dunedain Captains and Tharbad Warhammers. The Warhammers though, the AP isn't going to be too effective against Lindon. There are exceptions in the Lindon roster of course, but still AP is not the most useful asset to have against Lindon. Royal Court of House Thorondor and Dunedain commanders, so fast and deadly cavalry. And then WK, who's got some spearmen. He's got a lot of lower tier spearmen as well, the Greenwatch Garrison spearmen. Also has some Tharbad Warhammers, Hearthguard, Dunedain Captain, similar story here, Sharpshooters, more Miniscarithlan units, another Trebuchet. Trebuchet is a bit of a gamble, but we'll see if it pays off. Tharbad Riders, civilians. You know, it can be very dangerous, the Trebuchet, but it has a penchant for missing. We'll see if it does get some good hits off. The Elven manpower could really start to suffer. But without further ado, let's begin. So I would probably back Lindon here. I just think in 0.96 Lindon are the superior faction over Cardlan. Their infantry power is so much higher. They've got a lot of skill in melee, and also the areas where Cardlan are strong, Lindon can deal with that a little bit more easily than the other way around. A half decent hit there from the Trebuchet, going right through some pikemen. But Lindon are being aggressive, which is good to see. They definitely have the infantry advantage. That makes a lot of sense to get in there quickly. Von Mountain's Trebuchet also going after some Mithlon Marines here from Rules 1. And he is actually down below the terrain line a little bit, so maybe it is a good position for the Trebuchet to be in. Although he has nowhere to run if things go south. Archers could very quickly start to mess those positions up. Harland and infantry moving in as well. I think actually for now we will go down to half speed because all the engagements are going to happen all at once with this Lindon rush. So you can see the Harland infantry are leading the way. There's some stakes over here. Miniscarithlan swordsmen moving in, nicking the side of this pike block of the Harland infantrymen. You can see that Creed is now sort of moving his men to avoid the pike formation, so this obviously means that Inarius is going to have to move also to try and respond to that. Meanwhile over here you can see the Lindon chariots actually doing a decent amount of damage there to the archers, and of course chariots can plough through stakes and destroy them. So the stakes, no defence for the archers here, but there are pikes and spears nearby. And that is one thing that Cardlan do have in their favour. Lindon do have those chariots and some very, very nasty horsemen, but they do have a lot of pikes, Cardlan, so if Lindon misuse their horsemen, they're going to be in real trouble. Inarius' Trebuchet, however, is already coming under fire from the Ballista. Obviously the Ballista proving to be a very wise investment for the Lindon commander. Whoever chose the recruitment for Lindon was obviously thinking ahead. You can see here that Lindon are now engaging on the front line, and pike to pike, the 4 Lindon pikes are going to be stronger, and the Miniscarithlan, the Greenwatch Garrison spearmen, are going to offer very, very little in melee, especially against a faction as good as Lindon. Greenwatch Garrison spearmen are already pretty poor, honestly, at dealing with infantry, especially elven infantry like this. The Lindon cavalry, however, is pushing right through, and the onus, I think, is on Von Mountain a little bit to try and push forwards. But unfortunately for him, his back is to the wall a little bit. Rules is right up in his face already, which has left this huge gap in the line where Lindon has just gone right through. Inarius and Von Mountain deployed a little bit too far away from each other, for my liking. And Lindon have immediately exploited that. And Lindon's cavalry could run riot, honestly, back here, because Cardlan are going to really struggle to stop them with their units. Tharbad Riders are going to charge in here, and they will have the support of the Royal Court of House Thorondor. It's quite a lot for the Noldorin Horse Lords to deal with, but they will, because they are so strong. They will take losses from doing this, of course, but they will still be able to pull through this, I would imagine. Meanwhile, you can see that Lindon have engaged the Dunedain Captains with some of these 4 Lindon units, 4 Lindon Marines included. You can see here that Lindon, for the most part, they're just engaging on the front line with a couple of units of pikes, but they're really putting most of their stock into crunching into the side here and trying to work up the line. There's more mass on this part of the assault than anywhere else. You can see here that Inarius is now moving his Trebuchet. I'm actually surprised it's still alive. He's quite fortunate in that regard, to be honest with you. You can see there the Cardlan cavalry starting to move forward. I think WK and Eclipse 2500, they need to move a little bit faster. I mean, I am on half speed, which does warp the perception a little bit. But Inarius is really struggling here in the middle, because he's being attacked from both sides, essentially. And he is going to need some support. There's more L's from Lindon pushing forwards. There is actually these Noldering Guard who have taken a few losses from Creed, but they are still moving forward. Rules' front line is still just waiting there, but you can see here that, you know, Lindon are under no obligation to charge headlong into the Cardland pike blocks, and they've just avoided them for the most part. This Harland infantry has maybe pushed a little bit too far ahead, but they're still engaging some very elite units from Cardland here, which does go to show the gaps that are in their lines. Noldorin Horse Lords here from Creed. Lindon Marines getting charged actually by a combination of Tharbad Riders and Royal Court of House Thorondor, but they are spears, let us not forget. They aren't actually pulling their spears out though, they're standing and shooting. And look at those javelins, look. Spreading your javelins out so the cavalry can only attack one at once. And there we go, Von Mountain's general assassinated by Creed and his Special Forces Harlington infantry that he sent behind the lines. And now, really good coordination here between Creed and Rules, because now when Creed has got some support back here, that would be when Von Mountain would have peeled off some support, but that was when Rules came forward and is now engaging the full length of Von Mountain's line. This is bad for Cardland because they've not really been able at all so far to utilise their support units, and they need to, otherwise they're just going to get bled out at the wrists by the Lindon infantry. Lindon's infantry is much superior to Cardland, as you can see over here. Inarius' front line has collapsed. To be fair to him though, both of his flanks were pretty exposed. That gap between him and Von Mountain has proven to be pretty fatal, honestly. And you can see now that without the support of those spears offering their shields in front of the Warns of Tir Gorthad, they're immediately being targeted by all sorts of elven archers. And of course killing them off will take away the morale buff that's nearby, and he's being forced to move forward at this point. However, there is another engagement happening over on this flank, so Cardland are now pressurising the other flank, which perhaps needed to happen sooner, but WK did have to walk quite a long way. J-Monster has shifted his army over here to essentially block this attempt. We'll see if he is able to. Again though, I feel as though Lindon will be able to hold. The question for me would be whether or not Cardland's cavalry can find a soft spot, but the Warns of Harlington kiting backwards. And they are going to be able to kill off a few of these Tharbad Riders. Having a look back down here, there are some Noldorin Guardsmen moving forward to intercept the Miniscaruthlin Spearmen. This is the problem that you have if you're Cardland in this situation. Your infantry, if you engage one-to-one against most of the Elven units, you're just not going to be able to do much. The Lindon units are just superior in melee, really. And Cardland are having a real hard time of really making an assault stick here. Over here they're trying to push forwards, but they're having limited success doing so. The support of the Elven archers and the skill of the Elven infantry proving a little bit too much. Inarius was obviously flanked as well, which certainly doesn't help matters. And then over here Von Mountain is pretty isolated from his allies at this point. He's really backed up into a corner, right up against the sea. I'd jump in. I'd try and swim to that little island over there if I were them. Because it's not going well, and at this point Miniscaruthlin Sharpshooters having to be committed to melee. The AP will be somewhat useful against the Noldorin Guard, but the golfing quality is enormous there. And you can see even where Cardland are strong, you know, they can afford to field quite a lot of units for not a lot of money that can hold the line for some time, but the golfing quality is simply too much. The position of Von Mountain also made it quite difficult for him to use units like his crossbows to their fullest effect. The Dunedain captains are doing their best here, and they're a good unit, but there's only so much they're going to be able to accomplish. Also, these Wardens of Elos Tyrian were in the perfect position. They've been ripping through this front line. Cardland would have been able to hold on for a little bit longer than they have, if not for them, but you know, that's a golden opportunity that a unit of Rangers is never going to squander. So Von Mountain is almost completely destroyed, really. Inarius also, his army is in disarray, really. He's managed to regroup a little bit further back in the tree line with some of his more elite units, but there's not a lot of his army left remaining. Lindon will be taking losses this whole time as well. Like, they are pushing forward and they are having the better of this fight so far, but they don't have as much manpower as Cardland. All it takes is for Cardland to get a few good volleys off with their crossbows. They may have some rangers hidden here and there as well, and if they can use those units to good effect, the Elven manpower will not withstand as much punishment. Cardland's armies do tend to be quite large with their cheap pikemen and their militia units. Meanwhile over here you can see the Warns of Harlington charging in. And those were Rangers he was going after, which it's worthwhile to try and kill off Rangers all the time, but he took a full volley in the face there from those Miniscarithan sharpshooters. Pretty grisly. Dunedain captains moving forward. WK is making progress on this side. But J-Monster, all he really needs to do is hold the Cardinal assault at bay. Although having said that, WK is making progress, and in conjunction with Eclipse 2500, Cardinal are double teaming to a certain extent the units that are over here. Engsfitz has also shifted most of his army across to meet the advance of Eclipse, and this is where the Cardinal numbers are starting to come into their own. So on this side of the field, Cardinal are actually having a fairly good time of things. There's still one chariot left alive, but with the vast majority of Cardinal's infantry having at least a small anti-cavalry bonus with the spearmen, but also a lot of pikes, the chariots were always going to be limited in what they could do, but I would say certainly over here the chariots certainly paid their dues. Well, another engagement over here. 4 Lindon pikemen sent forward as a sacrificial lamb. You can see over here that now Rules is sending across units. Rules and Creed will certainly try to wrap up the line as soon as they're done finishing off what's left of Von Mountain, which, yeah, his army is doomed at this point. The Minotaur Romen Guardians have lost the stomach to fight. You know you're in a bad situation when that's happening. Miniscarithan sharpshooters are fighting to the death. I think that's just about it for Von Mountain's army, actually, unless he was able to save a unit or two. He might still have some cavalry. There goes a Lindon general. Mounted Dunedain are not to be taken lightly. They're not that much worse than elves overall. Meanwhile, still the trebuchets are firing, but Lindon are spread out enough that the trebuchets are having a hard time really targeting a big blob. Maybe they could go for these units over here, but it would not be worth risking friendly fire against something like the Tharbad Warhammers. J-Monster's units are over here. J-Monster on Engsfitz still trying to hold back. You can see that over here, Cardinal using their numbers and their width to stretch the elves as much as they could, and they've had success here. They now have the ability, WK, to start wrapping up the line, so while Lindon have collapsed one flank, Cardinal are in the process of doing that to Lindon as well, so managing to make the most of their situation here, which is good because making Von Mountain's sacrifice worth it. Inaria still has a couple of units, but I would imagine with the advancing armies of both Creed and Rules. There goes one of the Cardinal generals. Was that over here? No, it was pikes that killed them. Well, actually, maybe. 4 Lindon Marines throwing their javelins into the Hearthguard of Amon Sul. They're going to try and close the gap, but yeah, you can see that Inarius essentially has just got a couple of units here, which is they're going to try and hold back the advance of these Lindon forces. Lindon have been made to work for this, however. There is some Noldorin Blade Masters. I must have just missed them. There's also still some chariots left alive using their javelins to good effect. Here in the back lines, Engsfitz using his Wardens of Elos Tyrian up against the Dunedain Rangers. 2 units of Rangers fighting against one another, but the Wardens of Elos Tyrian, they've got those dual swords that they use. Their skill is higher, so even if they were both at full health, the Wardens of Elos Tyrian would win that. And the Dunedain Rangers are already, quite frankly, heavily depleted. Cardinal are going to need to win this fight over here a little bit faster, I think, if they're to hang on to any hope of winning this fight, but unfortunately for them, more elves have arrived over on this side, and now Eclipse is starting to struggle. Can WK make something happen would be my question. I'm not sure. I just don't think the Cardinal have got infantry of enough quality on display to really make an assault like this worth it. Cardinal are much better when they're on the defence and they have a sure position. But unfortunately for them, they were divided and conquered earlier on in the battle. Somewhat of a weird deployment zone, but they could have made it work, I think. What's going on over here? Have they taken up a defensive position up on this ridge? They've got some civilians over here. I don't think civilians are really going to cut the mustard if that's what it comes down to. The Marines using their javelins. Javelins is another thing that Lindon, of course, have over Cardinal. That close range stopping power that javelins can provide. It's not going to be good for Cardinal units like this. And Greenwatch Garrison Spearmen again, not very potent in melee at all. Wardens of Elos Tyrian victory seems certain. They're going to try and stop that ballista from firing just to buy them a little bit more time. WK still has banks of archers and crossbowmen firing. Not sure whether that's going to be enough though. Let's have a look at what the percentage of kills are. So yeah, Lindon are ahead, and I can't imagine Cardland are going to come back into this. That must be Inarius' general. As you can see, the skeleton crew that he had defending this hill over here, near his broken artillery piece, has finally been swept aside by the Lindon advance. Lindon infantry, the heart and soul of a good Lindon army alongside their pikes. It's very, very difficult to... There's very few armies which have as efficient a front line as that, especially in .96. Armour is always going to be an issue for Lindon, of course, but quite frankly I think the defensive skill is worth it for the most part. Lindon have got ways and means that they can use to deal with skirmish heavy armies. Good use of cavalry, and of course their own archers are not half bad. But unfortunately for Cardland, they just weren't able to use their skirmishers to the extent that they would have needed to win this fight. And it was always going to be tricky. I mean, when you're facing off against chariots, it's always going to be difficult to keep your skirmishers safe. But still, it's a very thin line of pikemen here. Still, these Noldering Guard fighting on, they're shaken. Not a sight you often see, the Noldering Guard thinking about routing. Fortunately for them, I can't really see a situation in which their army goes on to lose this battle. Greenwatch Garrison Spearmen are routing off. Still, WK's archers and crossmen trying to do what they can to salvage the situation, but well, there goes the Lindon General. Or a Lindon General. Last samurai style charge here from the 4 Lindon archers and the chariots. They just got mown down by the sharpshooters, and that was how Cardland needed this whole battle to go in order to win it. They needed to see more situations like that, because their infantry was only going to be able to do so much. But in the end, Lindon did a good job, especially early on. I think early on, when they sort of flanked Inarius, when they cut Von Mountain off, I feel as though the battle really was won and lost there by both sides. And WK did his best, but ultimately there was only so much that he could have done on this flank. Nothing against the Cardland players; they didn't really do an awful lot wrong, to be honest, Cardland. But the position was, the position they found themselves in when Lindon rushed them down was not ideal, and Lindon just coordinated very, very well. Warns of Elos here, and you can see there are still a few Hearthguard of Amon Sul over here with their large kite shields. But unfortunately for them, you can see Lindon just moving through the forest now, systematically destroying the pockets of Cardland resistance they encounter. And I can't imagine it'll be too long before the vast bulk of these Cardland infantrymen start to rout. The fight is most certainly going against them at this point. Scarithan sharpshooters are here. They're retreating as well, so 4 Lindon archers moving forwards. Still those 4 Lindon marines wavering. Some 4 Lindon archers, they are going to engage with the Scarithan sharpshooters. More archers firing into the Lindon infantry as they crest the hill. That over there is actually WK's trebuchet. It's too little too late, I'm afraid, for the trebuchet. Noldering Guard still fighting on the front line as Cardland pikemen rout all around them. Yeah, that was a phantom shot there as they try and retreat. Yeah, you can see here that the Cardland forces are starting to waver whenever they engage the Lindon in melee. Still a few units here just getting in the way. And this is an RP battle, so it is worth Cardland's time to try and kill off as much as they possibly can. Yeah, they did manage to get that volley off into the 4 Lindon Marines, but now they're going to get up close and personal with the Wardens of Elos Tyrion. Lindon just, again, move forwards. WK, I think he's going to try and take up the position that J-Monster held in the deployment phase up on this hill to try and kill off as much as he can, kiting backwards. I'm actually a little bit surprised that Lindon don't have any cavalry left in all of the chaos within the trees. There's a lot of stakes all over the place. So maybe that was what befell them. Still a few Lindon units over here which are going to try and hunt down that trebuchet over there, but really the only engagement left worth worrying about is the Cardland skirmishers. Scarithan sharpshooters trying to get in the way, pulling out their maces. A mace is not really the weapon you want against Lindon, unfortunately. point blank shot there from the archers and the crossbowmen. All of these Cardland forces have got decent armour. The Miniscarithan units do have decent armour, but unsupported morale is an issue. And also their skill. They are far outmatched by Lindon in that regard. One's Velos Tyrion pushing forwards. Ooh. Right through the gap in the shoulder armour. More one's Velos Tyrion pouring forwards, and overwhelming force is going to be applied to the situation now. Ammunition being traded back and forth. They still have ammunition? They still have their bows out. I guess it's not really worth. Oh, there goes WK's army, I think. Or is it? No, he still has his trebuchet. The main body of his infantry, of course, broke. Cardland certainly losing the stomach for the fight here. Let's see what the trebuchet crew can do though. Can they get a point-blank volley? Nope. They are instead going to engage in melee, glorious melee combat. But they're up against Mythlon Marines, so the trebuchet crew don't stand a chance. Victory seems certain for the trebuchet crew against the Mythlon Marines. That's the only time you'll ever see something like that. The trebuchet crew is the poorest unit in melee in the game. At least I think. I think that's what I've heard. That will actually change in 0.97. The trebuchet crew will be given stats akin to archers that have run out of ammunition, so they will at least be able to do something in melee rather than just be meat shields. The Mythlon Marines are shaken in the face of the mighty trebuchet crew. A real David versus Goliath situation here. Of course, the trebuchet crew still use the Arnorian model, or Arthurdane model. Now victory seems certain for the Mythlon Marines. I guess because they were exhausted. That was enough to swing the balance initially, but I mean, the trebuchet crew are getting the odd kill here and there, which is, quite frankly, more than I expected them to get. Well, I think actually the civilians are on the way over as well. Well, they're going to march forward. WK's civilians with the general. He's going to lead them out. But unfortunately for him, they won't last very long either. The last stand of two of the worst units he had in melee, tasked with trying to stop the Lindon armies in their entirety. Victory is a distinct possibility still for the trebuchet crew, even though they are now outnumbered by the Mythlon Marines. Medieval 2. Ah, there we go. Defeat seems like a certainty. It's about time. Let's go up to ×2 speed, I think. Evenly matched. Well, I mean, I've got to give credit to the Cardland forces for fancying their chances. Nothing wrong with a bit of confidence. What have we got going on over here? Some Harland infantry. Oh, that's ×6. Just go to ×1. The Harland infantry, I think, are going to try and interrupt the charge of the civilians. But unfortunately, with only two of them, I don't think they're going to be able to do that. The angry farmers and farmers' wives with their pitchforks and their shovels are going to charge into melee against some of the finest elven warriors in Middle-earth. Results about as you would expect. There's some ones of Velos Tyrion using their ammunition as well, as if to pour salt into the wound. This trebuchet crew gave a pretty good accounting of itself before being utterly vanquished, and that just leaves the civilians able to push through the horns of Velos Tyrion. Mythlon Marines are here. Now, those horns of Velos Tyrion could be killed off here. Not many of them left. Horns of Velos Tyrion still shooting the odd arrow in. Player has admitted defeat, so this fight was obviously decided quite a while ago. WK still making a good fist of it. Trying to make sure that the next battle, Lindon don't have quite the same level of manpower, perhaps. But yeah, in terms of infantry and cavalry power, Lindon are always going to have the edge in this sort of fight over Cardland. And Cardland just weren't able to use their trebuchets, nor their crossbows really, to the effect they would have wanted. WK was able to, on his side. Von Mountain and Inarius really had an uphill battle on their side. Very good coordination from Lindon. picking apart the formations that Lindon had, that Cardland had, that big gap between Inarius and Von Mountain. I've mentioned it a couple of times before, of course, but it does bear repeating. That Lindon went right through there, and there was, I thought there was hidden units there, to be honest with you, which is why it was there in the first place, a bit of an ambush, but in the end, it didn't really turn out to be like that at all. What's going on over here? WK still has some Miniscarithan archers that aren't off the battlefield yet. But yeah, there's nothing. Can't really criticise the Cardland players too heavily. I think they did what they could considering the situation. Lindon just coordinated very well. They charged in very quickly and did what they had to. And ultimately in 0.96.1, I do think that Lindon are the superior faction to Cardland objectively. I think they just have far more options, you know, far stronger overall. 0.97 obviously will change that around fairly substantially. Cardland will be getting tweaks, as will Lindon, as well as some new unit models for both, which I'm greatly looking forward to, of course. Miniscarithan archers are now wavering, but yeah, I mean, not too surprising the outcome in the end that Lindon won, considering how the battle started. And that's going to be the end. Miniscarithan archers are going to rout, at least I think that's the end. Surely that's the end. Or is there another unit over here? They're routing, they're not routing. Although I think WK is going to admit defeat because I don't think there's any Lindon forces nearby. No, he is going to admit defeat. So fair enough there. Well played to all players involved, and big thank you to Engspitz for sending me the replay. And I really do like these RP battles. And considering the summer release for any future RPs that happen on 0.97, I will actually be able to get involved now that University is no longer as much of an obstruction as it was. But regardless, you can see Von Mountain obviously got the fewest amount of kills because he was really up against it, right up against the sea, had nowhere to run to, very much back to the wall. Enemies killed on the other side, Rules and Creed coordinated very well to achieve that. Engspitz also putting pressure on Inarius from the other side, as well as helping J-Mons to stop the advance of Eclipse and WK. Cardland did what they could, but like I said, Lindon in the end just had far better coordination and are the stronger faction overall to my mind. Warns of Velos Tyrion, of course, Rules getting those Rangers right along Von Mountain's front line, doing horrendous damage to it. Perfect positioning, really. Harland and Infantry obviously are going to have the better of all of the Cardland forces on the other side. 244 kills on Mythalon Marines as well. Those javelins, very, very effective in those hands. Wardens of Velos Tyrion again getting a lot of kills. Archers, Harland and Infantry doing quite well for themselves. As for Engspitz, Wardens of Velos Tyrion 441 kills, so you can see that the Rangers for Lindon were very, very deadly. Dunedain Rangers for Cardland could have been that, but of course they didn't seem to have too many, so they weren't able to utilise them to quite the same extent. Noldorin Guard, Noldorin Horse Lords doing very nicely for themselves. What about, yeah, the Mythalon Nobles getting just over 100 kills, but Disruption, you know, they certainly paid for themselves in those terms. And again, J-Monster, Wardens of Velos Tyrion. So yeah, I think it's fair to say, based on kills alone, the Lindon Rangers were the MVPs, but the infantry and the cavalry as well were obviously something which were always going to give Cardland a bit of a problem. So yeah, thank you again to Engspitz for sending this winner. I do have another battle replay from the RP, I think. They are down to, like, you know, there are less factions involved now than there were, because it's coming to the end of the RP, I think. Now that 0.97 is right around the corner, I imagine they'll start up a new one when that happens. But yeah, I've got another replay on the RP, definitely a couple more for Reforged. Obviously I'll be doing a few more, I think, sort of top 5s and top 10s for 3 Kingdoms for the time being, as I wait for 0.97 to come out. So yeah, hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.